The audience is then challenged to decide for themselves who, in the words of James Cameron, is the bigger traitor between the main protagonist Jake Sully and the main antagonist Colonel Miles Quaritch. And I'm going to let you freely decide who is the traitor. I'm going to give you both versions of the Grunt and the Colonel. So we'll start with the Grunt, who is Jake Sully. Jake Sully chooses to side with the indigenous inhabitants of Pandora in defense of their homeland, in this case the Na'vi as a whole. He knows that there are high stakes involved in this conflict between the Na'vi and the humans, and the Na'vi know it too. These high stakes pertain to the livelihood of the Na'vi. For them, their entire livelihood is their homeland, and all the other creatures great and small, roaming around under the maternal eye of Awa, their deity. And Jake Sully knows this too. He also knows that the Na'vi have a direct line to Awa, and if that line is severed, it will demoralize them completely. Jake Sully finds no honor in helping his fellow men to irreversibly destroy the ancestral livelihood of the Pandora natives in their pursuit of resources, so he sides with the natives to fend off both the SecOps military force and the RDA personnel. Jake Sully puts this very well in his stirring battle cry to the Na'vi to defend their homeland and their livelihood. And I quote, "We will show the Sky People that they cannot take whatever they want." The Sky People referring to the humans and their flying gunships in the battle. And I continue to quote, "And this is our land." In other words, Jake Sully calls upon the Na'vi to take up arms and repel the encroaching humans who want to irreversibly destroy their land in their pursuit of resources. And now we shall turn to the Colonel himself next, Colonel Miles Quaritch. The Colonel chooses to become, in the words of James Cameron, a paid killer fighting for no just cause. His approach to any insurgency on the part of the Pandora natives is force, and at times his use of force is bordering on excessive. His attitude on the Pandora natives who want to keep their land and will not give it up is well summed in this assertion, and I quote, "Since a deal cannot be made, I guess things get real simple." When Colonel Quaritch says this, he is implying that the only solution to this defiance to SecOps and the RDA Corporation is force, and his use of force will be aimed at the heart of all cultural livelihood of the Omaticaya, which happens to be Hometree. And to lend an element of great unfairness to this conflict, the Omaticaya are woefully outmatched with SecOps in regards to their weapons and technology. SecOps has flying gunships armed with tear gas and incendiary missiles, while the Omaticaya have only their primitive but eco-friendly bows and arrows to resist the advances of the SecOps military. Colonel Quaritch and his gunship pilots strategically aim their incendiaries at Hometree's load-bearing columns, allowing the tree itself to fall. The Colonel and his men head back to base, possibly celebrating their victory, before being confronted with the problem of being outnumbered by the Na'vi. Colonel Quaritch and SecOps decide to conduct a preemptive strike against the Tree of Souls, the tree that allows the Na'vi direct communication with Awa, their deity, in order to demoralize the Na'vi. But Jake Sully puts a stop to his plans. Now, after being downed by Jake Sully, Colonel Quaritch starts unveiling the personality of a man bent solely on one personal aim: revenge. Now, you would think a commanding officer tasked with a great responsibility of keeping the personnel of his military force alive would remain objective, that is, detached from allowing personal emotions from hampering his ability to effectively coordinate his forces, coordinate a retreat, head back to base, and reorganize his forces for a next attack. However, the defeat of his military forces caused by flying pterodactyls and 8-foot-tall smurfs riding on flying pterodactyls, I think, for some reason, has taken a toll on his stressed mind and perhaps his pride. This may have allowed his lust for revenge to immediately influence his judgment shortly after the crash, thus casting the Colonel himself as a man after the blood of his main nemesis, who happens to be a mere grunt, Jake Sully. So, in essence, I think the Colonel Quaritch who would, as he told Jake Sully, take care of my own, has now emerged as Colonel Quaritch, a bad guy, who, as implied in the film, now has utter disregard for his own forces struggling to retreat from the battlefield, and bent solely on returning the favor to Jake Sully. He gets nearly totaled by Princess Neytiri and her giant carnivorous hound, before dueling with Jake Sully, and after nearly making Jake vulnerable to this toxic Pandoran atmosphere by breaching his Avatar driver's camper house, now gets defeated by Princess Neytiri's toxic but eco-friendly arrows. And so Colonel Quaritch is finally defeated in battle, having allowed himself to become victim to his own lust for revenge against Jake Sully. And this is the circumstance of the film where revenge, rather than being profitable, as the 18th century English historian Edward Gibbon once quipped, now proves to be the Colonel's ultimate downfall. As the old saying goes, pride comes before the fall. Now, just as a matter of being a little fair with the Colonel, I will justify his use of force on the grounds that the flora, fauna, and natives are hostile to the point of deadliness. However, if there is to be even a glimmer of hope the Na'vi and the humans will have healthy relations with each other, and if peace is to exist, making the lives of the RDA-based personnel a little easier, then the Colonel would be obliged to find peaceful ways to deal with the Na'vi. Now, while we're still on the subject of Colonel Quaritch, it is interesting to note in here, just to be a little fair with his character, that if you were to watch the parts leading up to the assault on Hometree in the theatrical version of Avatar, you would start to get the impression that Colonel Quaritch's use of force against the Na'vi had no justifiable reason other than to throw his weight around and show the Na'vi who's boss, just for the sake of being a badass character, or an asshole colonel, and to get the audience into the action soon. Now, while that is partially true, I think we should take into consideration that there was much more to the Colonel's motives regarding his assault on Hometree than just simply wanting to use force for the sake of using force. If you watch these same events prior to the Hometree assault on the Avatar Extended Collector's Edition version of the film, you will notice an extended scene where the Na'vi are burning the RDA construction vehicles and the SecOps military equipment, and killing all the personnel responsible for uprooting the Trees of Voices. A scene then shifts to where the Colonel and the rest of the RDA-based personnel, including the CEO, Parker Selfridge, are witnesses to the ghastly carnage of the RDA and SecOps vehicles and personnel destroyed by the Na'vi. This would, no doubt, explain the Colonel's motives leading up to the assault against Hometree. Well, that concludes part 3 of this lecture. In part 4, we will bring this entire lecture to a neat conclusion and convey a call of action to you listeners.